I'll begin in a moment talking to you guys about immigration updates. I'm available for questions. I do this in English on Tuesdays and in Spanish on Thursdays. Si estás más cómodo en español, nos vemos el jueves a las 12 de la tarde. But today is an English video. I'm waiting to go live on the other platforms and then I'll get going on news of the week. I've got tons of questions that have come in from you guys over the week. These are some really good ones. And then I'll be giving you a tip of what you can do to help for the week. No stress. It's all right. Thanks for being here on TikTok, guys. This is an immigration news update. I'm answering questions on Instagram. We've got a lot of news. It was not quite as eventful in the last week as it was maybe the week prior, but we did see a lot of activity with deportations and battles between the federal courts and the Trump administration, and we're sort of waiting to see a lot of those play out. We're good to go? Muy bien. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my live video. It is Tuesday, and I will be talking to you guys in English. I'm Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch from Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. I am an immigration lawyer, and I am here to talk to you about immigration news. My firm, Lincoln-Goldfinch Law, is based in Austin, Texas, but we are a virtual firm, so we can represent people really all over the globe, all over the 50 states. We believe in bringing peace of mind and security to immigrant families. I have 20 years doing this work, working with immigrant families, and my team is all bilingual. We're all very mission-oriented and available and willing to help you guys. Dave, behind the cameras, could I ask you maybe to pull the two cameras close to each other? That would be great. That's awesome. Thank you. All right, here we go. Oh, and also happy birthday to me. It's my birthday today. So here I am with y'all, which is my birthday gift. So let's start with the immigration news. Of course, it's not, the best news. So here, number one is regarding the Venezuelan migrants. We've talked a lot about how Trump administration has its sights set on Venezuelan migrants. I'm not entirely sure why. There was, during the Biden administration, a lot of Venezuelan migrants were allowed to come in under parole, or they applied for asylum. The CHNV parole program was for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and that was a way that people who had someone petitioning for them in the United States could come in. Many thousands of people came in legally. They were inspected and admitted, they got parole, they got TPS. And for some reason, Trump has decided that Venezuelans are, by and large, here to break our laws and are generally bad people. And so they're revoking TPS, they're pulling back parole, and now they're going after Venezuelan migrants and accusing them of being members of the Tren de Aragua gang, which is a gang that originated in Venezuela with some people who were detained there. And there's been just sort of willy-nilly accusations by the Trump administration against certain Venezuelans, though all the cases I've seen are young men, like men in their 20s who are from Venezuela. Some of them have tattoos, and that's one of the ways that people get accused of being gang members. Like maybe I've seen a couple of crown tattoos, which in certain other Central American gangs can be related to gang membership. But the Tren de Aragua doesn't actually have a tattoo requirement. But in any event, the Trump administration is using tattoos, but they're also, and I've read about some cases where they don't have any evidence of tattoos. None of these people have, or I shouldn't say none. The vast majority, as far as I can tell, of the young Venezuelan men who are being accused of being members of this gang do not actually have criminal history. And of course, the Trump administration has not shared with us on what basis they are, using or finding these accusations against these guys. So, but in any event, there's a lot of young Venezuelan men who are being accused of gang membership, and they are really targeting those guys. So these guys are the ones that are being sent to Guantanamo Bay. There now has been a plane. Okay, this is a big news item for the last week. A couple of planes of Venezuelans were being sent to El Salvador. And what happened in El Salvador, okay, so years ago, El Salvador was being overrun by gangs like the MS-13 gang, the Mara Salvatruchas. The gangs had sort of infiltrated like local law enforcement, local government. They were in charge, and a new president was elected and began an insane major crackdown um, against the gangs, and has opened these notorious Salvadoran prisons where gang members and suspected gang members are detained there indefinitely. Really, really harsh, hardcore detention centers. Okay, like the hardest in the world. They're notorious. Well, the president of El Salvador seems to be, cozied up with Trump. I mean, they tweet at each other and stuff. And the president of El Salvador has says, "We'll take your criminals. You can deport your criminals to El Salvador." And Trump, our government offered $6 million to send this group of Venezuelan suspected gang members to Salvadoran prisons. Well, the ACLU and impact litigators get involved, and there's a federal lawsuit in DC because the Trump administration says, "I'm invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This is a law that obviously is very old, that was at a time when we were contemplating going to war with France. And it's a law that created just really wide authority on the part of the president to detain and deport people without any due process rights. And it was meant to be utilized in a time of war against enemy combatants of a country with which we are battling. Okay. So it was used, this was the basis of Japanese internment during World War II in the United States. And it hasn't been used since then. So Trump is invoking this old law and saying, Venezuelan members of the Tren de Aragua gang are enemy combatants, and therefore I have carte blanche as a president to detain and deport these guys. Okay, so he's sending them to El Salvador. The ACLU brings a lawsuit, and the judge orders that these people are not deported, right? That because we don't have evidence, we have no idea on what basis they're deporting these men. But the judge issues a verbal order, okay, I'll get to questions in a minute. Thank you for the question. He issues a verbal order. What the Trump administration says is, the planes are already in the air, okay? And so by the time the written order supposedly enters the court system, the planes have already landed. There are questions around the timing of all of this. Then the president of El Salvador tweets, "Oopsie, too late," with like a little laughing emoji. Meanwhile, the attorney for the DOJ, right, for Trump's administration goes into federal court. The federal judge is saying, "You violated my order. I had issued a verbal order." And then the attorney stonewalls and starts to refuse to answer questions about the timing of these flights for national security reasons. So this potentially could be the start of the real showdown regarding our checks and balances. This is the point at which it appears as though the Trump administration is violating or ignoring court orders. If you guys, do you need me to pause? Okay, we're good. So this is the point with the issue we've all been waiting for. Like, the way our checks and balances work, of course we have Congress and we have the executive and then we have the courts. And right now, the way everything's playing out, the courts are really the only ones who are standing up to the Trump administration. But of course, they don't have armies, right? The Supreme Court does not have an army. And so once we get into the territory of the Trump administration openly violating or refusing to follow federal court orders, that's when it starts to get really scary. And it appears that could potentially be going on right now regarding these Venezuelan deportees to El Salvador. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we also have, and this is again the battle with the Supreme Court. So Birthright citizenship executive order. Under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, anyone born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. Trump issued an executive order on day one saying, actually, anyone who's anyone who is the child of an undocumented parent is not a U.S. citizen. Well, that violates the 14th Amendment very, very clearly, right? It's an overreach of presidential authority. So multiple lawsuits are filed, multiple judges, federal, district court judges issue nationwide injunctions, meaning you cannot implement this policy anywhere in the nation. It is blatantly unconstitutional. I mean, the words of these injunctions are pretty intense. What the Trump administration did last week is they appealed to the Supreme Court, but not on the basis of birthright citizenship, because everybody kind of knows this isn't going to fly, right? It's an overreach. What they're asking for is the Supreme Court to step in and say, a federal district court does not have the authority to issue a nationwide injunction. They can only enjoin orders or executive activities within their district, right? Like a really narrow location, which obviously would extremely limit the ability of the federal court system to have a check against presidential activity. So that's what Trump is asking the Supreme Court to rule on. The Supreme Court has been asked to rule on this exact issue in other areas and has declined to do it. They haven't granted cert on those appeals. And so in all likelihood, we're not going to see the Supreme Court step in, especially on a case where the president is so obviously overstepping constitutional authority. It's unlikely that the Supreme Court is going to come in and say nationwide injunctions are disallowed, but we're watching that. I'll also talk to you guys today about, we've seen several detentions of immigrants who normally would not be detained. People like Mahmoud Khalil, the green card holder, who was one of the leaders of the pro-Palestine protests in Colombia. He was detained. We talked about that last week. We also saw a detention of an H-1B visa holder. Her name is Rasha Alaway. I might be mispronouncing these names. She's a Lebanese kidney transplant doctor at Brown University. Super highly specialized work, obviously. She had flown home to Lebanon and had attended the funeral of someone who was a Hezbollah leader. She had photos of her, her at being at this funeral, meeting with people in her phone, and she had deleted those photos. And then she flew back in and she was sent to secondary inspection, and they took her phone and they went through it. So tip to immigrants, understand that your phones and your computers are fair game when you're coming into the country, really anybody. So she had deleted these photos. They went in and looked at her deleted photos, and she had said, I didn't want it to seem as though I supported Hezbollah leaders. They obviously interpreted it otherwise and detained her, and she will likely be deported after the revocation of her visa. We had Fabian Schmidt. He was a green card holder. I think this is the one. I had notes on him. Oh, so this is a good one for permanent residents. I'm getting a lot of messages right now from permanent residents who are worried about flying back into the country. If you've been out of the country for any extended period of time, or if you have a criminal history, you need to be really cautious and consult with an immigration lawyer before you come back in. Because this guy, Fabian, according to his mom, only had a 10-year-old possession of marijuana charge in California that had never gone forward because in the intervening time, marijuana had been legalized, and so he was never fully prosecuted. But he still had this open matter, right, on his criminal record. And drug convictions are an issue. They're a big issue in immigration cases. And so this guy, even though, possession of marijuana, LA, never convicted, green card holder, went to Germany, flew home, gets interrogated violently, according to his mom, and was in detention for, I think, a significant, several weeks. Then we had Ranjani Srinivasan, a Columbia University grad. She was from India. Oh, she was a Fulbright scholar, right? And she was at Columbia. She had only been present during some of the pro-Palestine protests. She was not one of the leaders of the protests, but she had been there and had been caught up in one of the kerfuffles in one of the protests. immigration came to her apartment. They did not open the door. She fled to Canada, and she's now essentially self-deported for just having been present at one of the protests. This is interesting. Camila Munoz is a Peruvian immigrant. She was married to a guy who voted for Trump in 2024, and he thought Trump was only going to deport the criminals when he made that vote. Then he married his Peruvian, I thought she was Colombian. She might be Colombian. But he married his wife, Camila, and they went from Wisconsin to Puerto Rico for their honeymoon. And they flew back from Puerto Rico. They met ICE, so that's a point. Even though Puerto Rico is one of the territories of the United States, flying back in from Puerto Rico means now you might encounter immigration. But because she had overstayed a visa, even though she was applying for an adjustment of status, she got detained, and her husband was flabbergasted that this could happen. So let's see. We also I did a video on this week, a little girl with brain cancer who was detained crossing the checkpoint with her family, U.S. citizen child, and her parents were undocumented. They all got deported. And then we had another German tourist who was held by ICE for 2 weeks. And there was even another one, Jessica Broshi and Lucas Seeloff. They were both interesting. There's a lot of German tourists getting picked up. Jessica had a visa, and she was a tattoo artist, and she had her tattoo equipment when she was coming in, and they said, "You're trying to work. You're not allowed to work when you're here." They detained her. She was detained for 6 weeks. It was really horrific for her. And then Lucas was a fiance of a U.S. citizen, German tourist, went from San Diego to San Isidro to get veterinary care for their dog. They were crossing back over the border, and he was detained. So the truth is, guys, a lot of this stuff has been happening for years. Not a lot of this is Trump administration stuff, and but this is different that it's happening, at the Canadian border to German tourists. The stuff that's really sort of like noteworthy are the people who are participating in the protests, who are getting targeted for free speech. I think that's the thing to me that really stands out. But as always, here's your immigration law advice. Don't assume just because you have a green card or just because you have a visa, you can just come in and out willy-nilly and no one's going to re-review your background, your history, and your intentions while you're here. That stuff gets checked out every time you leave the country and come back in. If you have any concerns whatsoever, please talk to a lawyer. So that's a lot of talking just on the updates. I'm going to try and get to some of the questions. I've got a couple of live questions here. TikTok, thanks for your happy birthday message. You say, I'm an immigrant. I just got married to a U.S. citizen. Are there any changes that I should know about? There's no changes on the adjustment of status process if that's what you're doing. Like if you enter with a visa and you're applying for an adjustment of status, they are updating the forms a little bit. You have to include your social media handles now, so pay attention to your social media handle. You don't have to get the COVID vaccine anymore. That's one of the updates. Nothing else drastic has occurred. They are taking some resources from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and giving them to ICE. So I think we're going to see a slowdown in cases. This is a quick Spanish question that I will answer, but stick with me, English speakers. I'll be right back in English. ¿Qué tanto tiempo se demora en obtener la certificación del formulario I-918B? Esa es la certificación para la visa U, y eso dependiendo de la agencia que está certificando el caso. Por ejemplo, aquí en Austin, el Austin Police Department está tardando, es rápido, menos de 90 días, pero puede tardar más dependiendo en el área. Okay. That's it for your immigration updates and your questions that are coming in live. Keep them coming. I'll prioritize your live questions. But let me go ahead and start answering some of the questions I've gotten over the last week. I'm Cuban. I've been living in Brownsville for almost 8 months. I was part of the MPP program since 2019. I lost my court case in 2020, did not appeal. I came in 2021, was detained for 10 days, then released under an order of supervision. What can be done for me? Honestly, nothing. We should meet. We should talk. If you have like crime victims, like if you've been a victim of a crime or domestic violence or a trafficking visa, maybe, some of these are cases that we can work on. Even if you were to get deported, we could still bring you back if they get approved. But having been denied, not appealed, and then entered and been on an order of supervision. These are all kind of some of the high-level things that the Trump administration is looking for right now. Pretty much all the people on orders of supervision are getting detained and deported, and because you've already got a deportation order, they don't need any approval from a judge or anything like that to deport you. So I would offer a consultation if you've been a victim of a crime or mistreatment at work, just to see, but in terms of your asylum case, it's going to be really tough. I'm sorry. What options does a person have if they were hired by a company to work in the United States, but upon arrival, they were not given the job, everything turned out to be a lie, and they were left without any compensation for expenses? This, to me, rings of potentially human trafficking. So a T visa case is when anyone's present in the US because of force or fraud or coercion at work. And one of the main examples of this is when people make promises and they bring immigrants here and then the terms change once you arrive. So I would love to speak with you about your eligibility for a T visa, which results in, work permit and then green card, and you can apply it for the whole family. So let's definitely talk. Next question. What can be done when an employer doesn't pay overtime and forces employees to work weekends without additional compensation while threatening termination if those requirements are not met? That last part, the threatening termination, is the part that I think really turns this into a potential trafficking visa because, like I just said, anytime an immigrant has worked under conditions of force, fraud, or coercion, indicates this might be a T visa case. And threats of deportation, of course, is coercive behavior. So mistreatment, yelling, threatening, not paying, lying, etc., could all potentially be a trafficking case. Also, you might have a wage claim, right? You might be able to recoup money that you weren't paid when you did work overtime. So you'd want to both talk to me, an immigration lawyer, and you'd want to talk to an employment lawyer. And there's organizations that offer these services. In the Austin area, there's Workers Defense Project and the Equal Justice Center are two great organizations that help people recoup unpaid wages from workplace abuses like this. So definitely pursue that. Is it true that under the new administration, children can no longer petition for their parents? No. That is not true. Children can still petition for their parents. Nothing has changed about that. This is a law that was passed by Congress. Our family-based immigration system was created during the civil rights era, right? We have decades and decades and decades of this law being in place. And in order for that to fundamentally change, Congress would have to pass legislation. The president cannot change family-based immigration systems without the help of Congress. Okay, I missed an appointment and they ordered my removal. So by appointment, I think you mean court hearing. I hired a lawyer who filed a motion to reopen, but the judge denied it. I'm sorry, on February 18th. He charged me $3,800 and now says I need to appeal before March 18th. I was told elsewhere that the appeal time has passed. Can you help? Yes, I need to look at what type of motion he filed to reopen and whether you were within the proper time and what the reason for the denial was. So whether we can appeal, whether we should appeal, what the deadline for the appeal is, really is case specific and dependent upon the facts. So based on this, I think your time may have passed, but I'd like to take a look at it. Okay, we can take a look at it. What should be done if fingerprints have already been taken for an immigration case and at some point you are detained by immigration? Here's the advice I'm going to give everybody about detention. Okay, immigrants have rights. And I know that Trump is trying to say like Venezuelan gang members have no rights. So there are, and protesters who support Hamas have no rights. So there are these pockets where Trump is trying to go in and say, we don't have to give people rights in these contexts, right? But in general, the rule of law in this country is that immigrants have constitutional rights just like US citizens do. And the right of someone who's been here for longer than 2 years is to stay here, fight your case, go before a judge, appeal any negative decisions, have a lawyer present, submit evidence and testimony, defend yourself. You have that right. The thing you have to know is not to sign over your own rights in the process of detention and deportation, because in the moment of the arrest, or in the moment of being processed before a deportation officer, or any of those moments, they're going to ask you to sign an agreement to self-deport. It's much easier for them. But you have to remember, you have the right to stay and fight your case if you've been here longer than 2 years, and you need to enforce your own rights in these moments. So this would apply to someone who's in some process, who already did their fingerprints, that if you get picked up, you say, either I've been here longer than 2 years, or if you're afraid of returning to your country, I want to seek protection under asylum or something like that. Of course, we should talk, or you should talk to your lawyer who filed your application, and make sure that you know what to say and how to protect yourself. Okay. Okay. Question about DACA. What's going to happen with DACA? Okay. Here's the deal on DACA. We're awaiting words from the Trump administration on this. Last week, a court order went into effect that could potentially allow DACA initial applications to be filed, because for years the DACA program has been caught up in courts, and the only people who have been able to keep going are the dreamers who already had work permits. This court order opens the door for DACA initials again, but in my firm, we're not filing DACA initials until we have some indication from the Trump administration that they're going to be approving them. Otherwise, it's a waste of money. It gets you on the radar. It's not something that I'm going to recommend. Okay. But stay tuned about that, because we're real close to, I think, having an update. An update for people who filed for the I-130. No updates. All of that's the same. It's a family-based immigration case that has not changed. So if you have a specific question about an I-130 case, feel free to ask, but no updates on family-based immigration. All right. What should you do if you're detained and asked for identification, but the only ID you have is matricula consular? Is it advisable to show up, or should you not show anything at all? I don't think anybody should be showing any evidence of foreign nationality to law enforcement in this era, because ICE has to prove that you are of another nation in order to deport you. And you don't have to turn that evidence over to them. You have a right against search and seizure. You have a right to remain silent. These are your constitutional rights. So, but you do have to identify yourself in many instances. For example, in the state of Texas, if you are being arrested, you have to identify yourself. That is a law. So you can identify yourself with your words, your name, your address, and your date of birth, or you can get a document from the United States. There are several states who will give documents or licenses or IDs to undocumented people, but also there's many library systems that are giving IDs to people. For example, in Austin, where I live, you can get a library card that has your photo and all your identity information, and you could use that. So I do think you should leave your foreign identity documents at home in this era. That would be my advice. Okay, via TikTok. I applied for my DACA renewal. It's been on hold for 3 months. It's now expired. Can I no longer get my DACA? No, you can. DACA renewals are going forward. 3 months is a little bit outside what we're seeing in terms of processing times, but still very within the realm of reasonableness. I'm sorry that you expired. Let's take a look. If you didn't have a lawyer do that case for you, go ahead and reach out to us for a consultation, and we'll look at your application and make sure there are no issues. We can help you with that. What would happen to my house and car if we are deported? Would we lose them? Is there anything that can be done to protect our property? What you need to have is a person you trust who has the authority to sell these items for you. That can look like you hire an estate planning attorney and you create a living trust, and your sister is a co-trustee and she can sell these items for you. Or you create a power of attorney document for your brother-in-law. But the situation, it's going to be different for everybody. And the more property you have, the more complex it's going to be. Like if you have a business and a house and a couple of cars, you want to hire a lawyer to help you create a plan. If you just have a car, maybe you can make sure your brother knows where the title is, right? So it depends upon how complicated your estate is, but it's definitely something to be thinking about. And I'm planning on bringing a guest in the next couple of weeks to help talk through some of the specifics of this stuff with y'all, an estate planning lawyer. I'm a permanent resident. I have a class 1 misdemeanor in my record. My case was dismissed. If I travel to Mexico, would I have problems returning? If it really was dismissed, you shouldn't have problems. But sometimes they do something like deferred adjudication or something that, isn't actually a dismissal under immigration law. So oftentimes your criminal defense attorney will tell you your case was dismissed, but for immigration purposes, it still counts as a conviction. And if it was a class 1 misdemeanor, that's the most severe level of misdemeanor. And if it has anything to do with drugs or theft or violence or weapons, it could be a deportable offense, and you could potentially have an issue even if you got a dismissal. So I would recommend before you travel, you come consult with me or my firm, and we'll review the record and tell you if there's any issues, and we can tell you what you need to bring with you. Okay, I'm at time. Thanks, guys, for your questions. Thanks for being here with me on my birthday. I'm going to give you your action tip of the week. One regular question I get from people is, what can I do to help? I'm tired of just calling my legislators. What else can I do? And I don't have a lot of money to donate. Okay. So we're just going to be spreading the word about how awesome immigrants are, how much we love immigrants in this country. Last week, the tip was go to a foreign restaurant and learn something about that country. I ate at an Indian restaurant, and I learned that India is the second country where English is spoken, second largest country where English is spoken in the globe. Pretty cool. And so here is your action item of the week this week. Watch a movie in a language you don't speak or about a country you've never been to before. Reflect on the language. Is it in Turkish? Isn't Turkish such a beautiful language? So beautiful. Listen to the language and learn something about that country that you've never learned before. And even better, post about it online. Tell people you watch this movie, what you learned about this country. Let's just spread the word about how awesome human beings are all over this globe, not just Americans. That's what we're doing here, guys. So thanks again for being with me. I'll see you next Tuesday in English, and I'll see you Thursday in Spanish and my live video. Have a great day.